All right. The title of today's sermon is Godly Womanhood. Godly Womanhood. I don't think I've ever preached on this topic before. Never really felt like this was something that I was an expert on. But I'm gonna attempt it today. So sisters, please, be forgiving, be graceful, and I'm gonna try my best. Okay. Godly womanhood. All right. And so we're going to be in Exodus, and some of you might be wondering, okay, why are we jumping all the way back to Exodus? Okay, we just did Acts. We're jumping back to Exodus. Basically, our curriculum is taking us back to Exodus because there's so many parallels to Christ, even in the Old Testament, right? I've told you guys about how prophetic the Old Testament was about Jesus, of the coming Christ, okay? And so we see that in the Old Testament, God was always a God of deliverance, and He, at many times, saved His people. But in those deliverances, in those savings, what you see is a foreshadowing of Christ, okay? And so what we're doing is we're going back to the Old Testament to see the signs of Christ, okay? And then also, why are the Israelites in Egypt? Before we get into the passage for us today, just to kind of hit the backdrop for a moment, right? Why are the Israelites in Egypt? If you guys remember, Joseph's brothers were jealous of him, sold him into slavery, and then he won favor with Pharaoh because he was able to get them through a famine, and he moved up into the ranks, okay? And so Joseph and God's people, they were able to enjoy that favor, okay, and those good times. But then there's a new Pharaoh in town now who is getting a little paranoid, right? God's people, they're getting a little too big. They're growing a little too much. Hey, what if they end up like overthrowing us? He's getting a little too paranoid. And so that's what's going on in this passage for us today, okay? But as we go through this story today, I not only want to highlight the parallels of Christ, but as I was preparing the message today, I couldn't help but be impressed. I mean, obviously, it's awesome and really cool that we see the parallels to Christ, you know, this far back in the Old Testament. But I just could not be more amazed at the women, the ladies that were at work in this passage today. And so I really want to hit on that today, okay? So Exodus chapter 1, we're going to start in verse 6. We're going to read Exodus 1, 6 through 14, and then we're going to jump to chapter 2 and read verses 1 through 10, okay? Here we go. Exodus chapter 1, verse 6. Joseph and all his brothers and all that generation eventually died. But the Israelites were fruitful, increased rapidly, multiplied, and became extremely numerous, so that the land was filled with them. A new king who did not know Joseph, came to power in Egypt. He said to his people, "Look, the Israelites are more numerous and powerful than we are. Come, let's deal shrewdly with them. Otherwise, they will multiply further, and when war breaks out, they will join our enemies, fight against us, and leave the country." So the Egyptians assigned taskmasters over the Israelites to oppress them with forced labor. Yeah, I don't know what other kinds of stuff they were building after the pyramids and all that, but they were forcing some sort of forced labor on them. They built Pithom and Ramesses as supply cities for Pharaoh. But the more they oppressed them, the more they multiplied and spread, so that the Egyptians came to dread the Israelites. They were fearful of the Israelites. They worked the Israelites ruthlessly and made their lives bitter with difficult labor in brick and mortar and in all kinds of field work. They ruthlessly imposed all this work on them. Okay, let's pause there for a moment. Okay, this is obviously a horrible situation. Not an ideal situation, okay? They've basically become slaves, having to do extremely hard labor, okay? But what we see time and time again is that even as bad as a situation may be, if God is with you, you're still able to prosper. Okay? And we're seeing that playing out here in this story as well, okay? But it's about to get much worse. It is about to get much worse. I don't know if you guys remember, but Pharaoh will get so paranoid and so desperate, right? Nothing he's doing is working. He's forcing them to do all this hard labor and making their lives miserable, but it's not working. They're still growing. They're still looking like a threat. Okay, he's still getting more and more paranoid and desperate, and he gets to a point where he forces all the Hebrew midwives. Okay, so those that were hired to help raise the babies for the Jews. Okay, they were forced to drown all the Jewish newborns in the Nile River. Okay, and they didn't want to do it, but he kept pushing it. He kept enforcing it. And so, just for a moment, let's just imagine that horrible dilemma. Right? Imagine having to be one of those Hebrew midwives, where it's either take the lives of these innocent babies, or your life will be taken, right? I mean, just imagine having to drown a little baby, right? Like, the normal human instinct is to hold those precious little babies and to just, right? Like, just to adore their cuteness, and that's the human instinct, right? But you have to go completely against your instinct to drown these little babies, right? Just imagine that for a moment, let alone the terror that the moms felt, right? Again, going completely against human instinct, right? Like, like the whole mama bear instinct, right? There is probably nothing scarier than a mama bear, right? There's, just the instinct of a mom, especially with their newborn, is to protect them, right? To do everything that they can to protect them. And they're having to go completely against all human instinct. Okay? But in this dark, dark time, there will be some godly women. They just come out of nowhere, like the Avengers. Okay? And I don't know what happened to all the men, fellas. Where are we at? Where are we in the story? I don't know where all the men went, right? Why they were all just cowardly and just probably complaining about their horrible situation. But the Jewish people, they are on the brink of extinction. Okay, just let these things sink in, right? Just imagine, okay, I think we're not all completely Korean here, okay? So my apologies, but just, since we're predominantly Korean, just imagine, okay? Our people, our race, Korean people, are on the brink of extinction, okay? And then these special women appear, okay? Here we go. Now, a man from the family of Levi married a Levite woman. The woman became pregnant and gave birth to a son. When she saw that he was beautiful, she hid him for 3 months. Okay, and the better translation in the Hebrew for beautiful is actually good. Okay, so it's the same word that God used when He created us and saw that it was good, saw that we were good. Okay, and so I really want us to kind of pause and get this. Okay, because I think this is a key to biblical womanhood, like we're talking about today. I think this is key for fellas. We struggle with this a little bit, but we this is what we should be striving towards. Okay, but why is this so important for us to get this part right here? Okay, seeing that something is good and loving that, taking care of that, embracing that. Okay, why is that so important? Okay. Just to give you a practical example, I've shared this before, but when I had Hajin, my first son, I fully knew that he was going to be a very sinful kid, right? He's got my genetics. If anything, he's going to be like me, maybe even worse, okay? I fully understood human nature, sin nature, that he was going to break our hearts at some point, whatever, right? But when we went to that first the OBGYN visit, right? And we saw the sonogram and we saw the little peanut with the heartbeat, right? And we got to listen to the heartbeat, right? There was nothing that could stop us from doing whatever we could to make sure that this little peanut would become a healthy, boy, right? Would just be, we would do our best to make sure that he would grow well in mama's stomach. We would do everything in our power to make sure that he would be delivered and healthy and happy and all of that, right? Nothing could have stopped us, right? And there's nothing in our life at that point that could have distracted us, right? Like this was the most important thing in our lives in that moment, okay? And this is, guys, the heart of the Father that we all need to learn. Okay, just say it with me. I need to learn this. There's like 4 of you. I need to learn this. Because as Jesus said, we're not called to love those that are easy to love. Right? That's not God's love. We are called to love those that are hard to love, those that are not loved, because that's what God did for us. That is the grace of God. That is the true nature of God's love for us. That He loved ones, He loved me, who is hard to love. Agape, God's love, is not calculated like human love. God doesn't calculate His love like we calculate our love. Right? The love that we practice, guys, it's not of God, it's of the world. Say it with me, it's of the world. All right? It's, hey, what do I get out of this? Right? Is this a waste of my time? Right? Is this a little too inconvenient? Right? Like, there's better things I could be doing with my time. Or, hey, you can't talk to me like that. Right? Who do you think you are? Or do you think you're better than me? Our love is very calculated. It's very conditional, right? But God's love is not calculated. It is grace. It's a free gift. And so, guys, if we don't, and this is the point I'm trying to make, okay, if we don't get this, then we won't get God. Do you want to get God? Raise your hand. Who wants to get God? Okay, most of us. Okay, cool. Right. If you don't get this, you're not going to get God. Right? And if you don't take steps, if you don't wrestle on a regular basis with the love of God and what it means to you, and then the struggles of living that out, letting that play out in your life, if we don't go on that track, okay, if we don't live that out, you'll eventually, right, like it's a progression, right? It happens slowly, probably gradually. For some, it happens overnight. But you'll eventually, what's at the end of that tunnel, what's waiting for you is a selfish atheist. All right, anybody want to be a selfish atheist? Raise your hand. Okay, good. All right. You know, I have seen it happen. I have seen it happen. I've seen it play out. I've had these conversations with people in our very church. Okay, people here, right? Where, okay, guys, focus. Come on. Why are we so ADD? Focus. Look at me. All right, look at me. Hey, Shiro, look at me. Come on, look at me. Okay. Aaron, right here. Okay, come on. Okay. I'm trying to make an important point here. See, that's why I wanted that wall. All right. Okay. Woo! I think I'm ADD too. That kind of got me too. Okay. So, what I'm trying to say is this, okay? I've seen this happen with people even here in our own church. But I've seen this happen in church for just, almost my whole life, okay? Where if you do the whole church thing, you do the whole Christianity thing, right? But you don't take the steps to really digest the grace of God, right? You don't take the steps to really try to understand this free gift of grace from God, and then taking the hard steps of trying to allow it to play out in your life, right? What eventually ends up happening, okay, and this is a whole nother conversation. I'm not going to go into the little nuances and the details, but eventually what ends up happening to people is that because they didn't take the time to understand God's love and getting deeper in knowledge of it by living it out, right? You eventually, you just don't learn godly love. Right? You don't love sacrificial, selfless love, right? And you allow just kind of the worldly, fleshly sort of love to take over in your life, and like you eventually get to a place where life is just about you, and it's almost like it almost becomes impossible to recover from, where you become an adult that's just life is all about you, right? And this is why I'm hoping things change for you guys, but for the generation before you, right? So many people just lost all desire and need, like they felt no need to have a family or to have kids, right? Because life became all about you, right? You became very selfish instead of selfless, okay? And then what happens when you don't come to try to process and understand God's love? Then you no longer understand God and know God. And so you eventually become an atheist, someone that doesn't believe in God. Okay? And so we cannot know God apart from this love. Okay? And the Bible tells us that God is love. Okay? So if God is this love, if God is this agape love, then we have to grapple with that. Okay? And so this very love is what saved Moses and eventually a whole race of people. Okay? So that's a pretty cool type of love to know and to practice. A love that saved a whole race of people. Right? Okay, verse 3. But when she could no longer hide him, Moses' mom, she got a papyrus basket for him and coated it with asphalt and pitch. She placed the child in it and set it among the reeds by the bank of the Nile. Okay, water has always been kind of symbolic of death. Okay, obviously there was Noah's flood. All right, and the word for basket here is actually the same word that was used for Noah's ark. Okay, so there's definitely some parallels with this and Noah's flood. Okay, and then eventually, even in this story, we'll eventually get to the Red Sea. That was obviously God's wrath and death for the Egyptians. Okay, and then even in baptism, right? What do we practice? There's going to be a baptism today, actually, this afternoon. But when you get dunked in that water, what does that represent? Anybody? Dying, right? Dying to your old self, dying to sin, and then you come up out of that water, born again, a new creation, right? Even if you look in like Revelation, right, where did the beasts come from? They come from the water, right? And so imagine this scene, okay? You've got a river full of death. It's not just symbolic, but it's literally a river full of death. Every time I see like movies or something, like depictions of this story, I never really see it, but there's probably some dead babies in here. Okay, so just imagine that, okay? Dead babies, terrified moms, okay? And only a waterproof vessel provided by agape, godly love, could bring salvation in this moment. Okay? And in the same way, Jesus was the waterproof vessel, the sin-free, the death-free, waterproof vessel provided by God, for God so loved the world. Agape love. Okay? So parallels right there. Okay? Verse 4. All right. Then his sister stood at a distance in order to see what would happen to him. Okay, so just, look at Miriam, right? How she is watchful, loving sister, looking for a way to help, okay, to better the situation. Verse 5, Pharaoh's daughter went down to bathe at the Nile while her servant girls walked along the riverbank. She saw the basket among the reeds, sent her slave girl, took it, opened it, and saw him, the child, and there he was, a little boy crying. You good? Who was that? Dude, that was obnoxious. Okay, sorry. Okay, she felt sorry for him and said, "This is one of the Hebrew boys." Then his sister, she saw the opportunity, said to Pharaoh's daughter, "Should I go and call a Hebrew woman who is nursing to nurse the boy for you?" We're talking about breastfeeding here, okay? And little did this woman, Pharaoh's daughter, realize that this might be Moses' mom. But she says, "Okay, go," Pharaoh's daughter told her. So the girl went and called the boy's mother. Then Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this child and nurse him for me, and I will pay your wages." And so she not only gets her son back, but she gets paid for it. Okay? Thanks to the quick thinking of Miriam, his sister. So the woman took the boy and nursed him. When the child grew older, she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. She named him Moses because she said, "I drew him out of the water." So that's what the name Moses means, being drawn out of water. Okay, this is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. Okay, so before I talk to the ladies and I hit on biblical womanhood, I want us to remember that we all need to be Moses. That we all need to be drawn out of that water. We all need to be drawn out of death. We all need to be drawn out of sin. We all need to be drawn out of the hopelessness of just the wretchedness of mankind and our sin nature. And we need to be drawn out by God to be made new, okay? Just like we practice in baptism. Baptism is just symbolic of that, okay? Now, what made these women special? What set them apart from the men who are, I don't know what they're doing. They're not here. They're not doing anything to help the situation. I don't know where the men are at, okay? But what set these women apart? What did God see lacking in Adam that he put in Eve? Any thoughts? Ladies, what do you have that men don't? Don't say brains. That's not nice. Just like, I caught you. I read your mind. What did God see lacking in Adam, men, before you think you're superior and all that, right? What did he see lacking that he provided in women? I like to use this term, and I feel okay about it because I know a lot of other pastors that use this term, but EQ, okay? So kind of like IQ, but EQ. We're talking about emotional intelligence, okay? Ladies, just a little preview. There's most likely like 98% chance that this will drive you insane in your marriages. Hopefully you all get married, your future spouses, because a lot of guys struggle with this. We have very low EQ, right? And it'll drive you insane. Okay, do you have any married? Teacher Dinah, I think you're the only one. Did this drive you insane ever? No? Okay. Oh, yeah, she's trying to make not make Teacher Don look bad. Okay. All right. But guys, I believe that and this is something that I've definitely struggled with a lot, right? But I believe that we're not called to just be I don't know if you guys know this term, but stoic, right? As guys, to just have no emotion, just base everything off of logic, right? I think that this kind of gets glorified in the culture of manhood, right? But I want to say today that I don't think that's a good thing, right? And I don't think that's something that we should praise in each other, and I don't think that's a culture that we should encourage amongst the guys, right? Because even Jesus made decisions based on what he felt in his heart, right? There were a lot of times where Jesus, he was sidetracked from his ministry. He pulled to the side. He pulled over because of, I use this word a lot, but that splunk nitzomai, right? That compassion that he felt so deep in his heart that he had to do something about it, right? And I think this is something that women definitely tend to be better at than men. But it can be used for evil as well. It's really the point I want to make today, right? Sometimes, a lot of times, the emotional decisions can be rooted in sin and cause harm, okay? A lot of times we can use this to harm others. But I want to encourage the ladies to let God redeem what many of you are naturally better at and use it for good, specifically for God's will. Okay? And guys and fellas, this is something that we may never excel at, that we may never be really great at, but this is something that you should strive to grow in. Okay, that we shouldn't just throw in the towel and be like, oh, I'll never be good at this. Because if you want to get married, right, you want to be a good husband, you want to be a good dad, you're gonna have to grow in it. Okay. And so, ladies, some good news. Okay, I believe that you are not created simply to bear children. But at the same time, I do not believe that you were created to have a good career, to just have a good career, just to merely have a good career. Okay, I think that misses the point entirely. Okay. I believe that God has created you. Ready? Ready? You want to know why God created you? Okay. I believe that God created you to mother His kingdom. To mother His kingdom. Okay, if some of you are like, oh, what is that? I don't want that. Like, that doesn't sound that great. Okay, I can't help you, right? But I believe that is an amazing calling. To mother God's kingdom. And what we see is that God uses your EQ all throughout history. And most importantly, salvific history, okay, salvation history, His story, God's story. Even Jesus was born through the faith of women. The first testimony, woman. The first accounts of an empty tomb, women. The most extravagant worship that we see in the Gospels, women. Right? We sing that song all the time, right? Is it a fragrance? It's about the alabaster jars of the women. But what took them there? What brought them there? What brought them to some of the most beautiful pictures of worship that we've seen? What drove them to the empty tomb to find that Jesus isn't there and then to go out and to tell people about what happened? What drove them to these places? It was that EQ. Right? Even in this story, I believe that Miriam is such an underrated star in this story. This is an amazing young girl. I hope, my preaching is limited, and I'm just, I wish I was better at it. But I really hope that you guys can just feel how amazing this young girl is. This Miriam. Right? The way that she was watching in love, the way that love drew her to keep following by the river, to make sure that her little brother is okay and the little basket hasn't capsized. And love kept her there enough for the right moment, the opportune moment, the kairos, right? The opportune moment. And then to make that quick EQ decision to ultimately, and I don't think she realized it in the moment, but what she did was huge. She was the key bridge in that moment to save an entire race of people. If Miriam was not there, drawn by love, drawn by her heart, drawn by EQ, the love of God, if she was not there, then who knows what would have happened, right? So I'll close with this. Pharaoh thought that only the men were a threat. We do that a lot, right? Pharaoh thought only the men were the threat, right? These boys could grow up to be strong men and to be in the military and to be able to fight and all that. And so he only thought the men were a threat. And so he went after the male babies. But we see here that the high EQ women, even as young as Miriam, were the greatest threat to evil in this moment. Right? The biggest help to God and the biggest threat to the enemy were the women right here. And so, ladies, that's my challenge to you today, is can you be a Miriam? And brothers, can we strive to learn from Miriam? To not just be any threat, but to be a real threat to Satan because we stay in tune with God's heart. All right, let's bow our heads. Guys, we have a lot of repenting to do, fellas. And it's not all your fault, right? I don't want to put it all on you. But as guys, we have um, perpetuated a culture that does not help us in God's kingdom. Right? It does not help us when we try to remove emotions from the picture, and we try to be as stoic as possible, and we glorify that. Right? Because what we see in this passage today is that it is those that are in tune with God's heart that were the ones that were able to stand up at the right time, at the opportune time, and save an entire race of people. It was those that God used to deliver his people. But like I said, it can't be just any emotion, right? Because emotions in our sin nature, it actually is used for more bad than good, right? It's used to hurt people, and even when we think it's good, it actually does more damage. But can we redeem our hearts? Can we redeem our emotional intelligence to be used by God? And so let's just take a moment to offer up our hearts to God. Say, God, I don't know exactly everything that has hardened this heart, that has made it so hard for me to feel what you feel, to allow my heart to break for what breaks yours, for me to so many pastors say that the seeds of revival are sown in tears, right? It's when we get on our knees and we break for the things that break God's heart, right? When we cry out on behalf of our fellow brothers and sisters, that we play the intercessor, we play the bridges like Miriam, and we invite God to come and work in our midst. But can we offer up these hearts to God and say, God, I want to feel what you feel. I want my heart to break for what breaks yours, God. I want to be in tune with your heart, God. I want to feel your heartbeat. Right? And then let's take a moment to ask God, what is your heart breaking for in my life right now? Right? What are the areas in my life where I can be a Miriam right now? Right? Where are those places where my heart has become so hardened that I'm neglecting, but I want you to soften my heart to start not neglecting those things? Right? For some of us, for a lot of us, and this was for me as well, it was my sibling. It was my own little sister, where I allowed my heart to become so hardened, and I just stopped caring, and we had no relationship, and it was as if we weren't even brother and sister. And maybe that's the area in which you need to become the Miriam, where you need to allow God to break off the callousness, the hardness of your heart, and for you to start practicing godly EQ in that relationship. All right, maybe it's certain people, right? Certain friends that you don't talk to anymore because they've scarred you, right? They've done something to you. Right, let's take a moment to really meditate on that. On what are those areas in which God needs to make your heart soft and tender once again. Okay, so let's pray.